Hi everyone, my name is Grant and I'm honored to be one of the pastors at Summit Church in Spokane, and we're grateful that you would take the time today to just be encouraged through the Word and listen to this sermon. Our heart is that this online resource would be just that, just a resource, not primary but supplemental to your faith, and that you would engage in community with other believers, whether that's in Spokane or in the city that you live in. If there's anything that we could do to help you step into community, please let us know and we would love to be a part of that with you. But I hope you're encouraged and challenged as we get into the scriptures today.
We're going to jump in today. We are in a very weighty passage. We're in Mark chapter 14, and this one has been taken a lot of time in my life for the last several weeks, and so I want us to kind of jump in and get it. I do want to begin by relaying to you an account that takes place way back in what we call the 80s. I had the designation youth pastor. We were living in Hamilton, Montana, and I had a really rough week, and so we had this Friday, Saturday, Sunday college-age thing that was going on in Bozeman, 4 hours away. And I was really tired, and so I asked one of my college-age guys, do you think you'd be okay, like driving me, if you could wait around and we'd go together, and would you be able to drive me, because, I'd like to take a little nap and kind of whatever. He said, oh, yeah. I said, you sure you'll be okay, because I know you have to work that day too. Go, yeah, no problem, man, I'm gonna be fine. And so we did it. We took off, and I was just starting to nod, and about 20 minutes later, I looked over, and he was literally nodding off. His eyes were closing. I was going, hey, man, how you doing? Do you want me to drive? Would that help you? He goes, yeah, man, that'd be great if you don't mind. Okay, so I drove to Bozeman, and God helped me, And it's not like none of us has ever been tired when we were driving, am I right? I mean, we've all experienced that. And it hits a little bit close to home, sure. But in this case, I asked, could he handle it? Could you handle that thing? And he assured me that he could. And of course, what comes to mind is don't make promises that you can't keep. and there's two parts of that we're going to kind of come around to again here this morning, and part of it is promises that you can't keep, and the other one has to do with sleeping itself. Now, as we move into this part of the account, we remember what Peter has told Jesus back in verse 31 of chapter 14, where he says, even if I have to die with you, I will never betray you. And then it says all the others vowed the same thing, okay? So put a pin in that and kind of keep it in the back of your head. And let's move into today's passage, Mark 14, beginning in verse 32. They went to the olive grove called Gethsemani, and Jesus said, sit here while I go and pray. He took Peter, James, and John with him, and he became deeply troubled and distressed. He told them, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. He went on a little further and fell to the ground. He prayed that if it were possible, the awful hour awaiting him might pass him by. Abba, Father, he cried out, everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine. We know that they're coming from that Last Supper scenario that Pastor Grant covered so well last week. It was so good. And now they walk together through what is the valley of Kidron, the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives, surrounded by a lot of very old olive trees. And actually this name Gethsemani means olive press, the place where olives were crushed for their oil. Can we take just a second and see the irony here? This is the thing. This is the place where he's going to struggle in prayer with his Father on the night before he'll be betrayed. and before he'll experience the cross, his own place of crushing. And I'd like to jump in and consider a couple of main thoughts together, two main things and a couple of subpoints, under those. First one, I want to talk about the struggle that Jesus faced, okay? If there's any question in your mind regarding how all of this is affecting him, look at the end of verse 33 where it says, he became deeply troubled and distressed. And it occurred to me that you don't often hear terms like that and language like that applied to Jesus. He's generally at peace. He's really calm. And if you consider all of the incidents regarding the chief priests and the Pharisees and all the others who came at him, trying to rattle him mentally, emotionally, you and I would be totally stressed with that kind of stuff. But we can picture the face of Jesus. His enemies throwing so much at him, and he's calm and he's at ease because he knew who he was. He knows who he is. He has what I would call a settled identity. He knows who he is, something sorely missing in current culture. Tonight, in the middle of this orchard, there with his disciples, they set up this time to pray, but he's so troubled and he's so distressed, so much so that he says in verse 34, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. You guys stay here and keep watch with me. Here's the thing. You can count the number of times Jesus asks his disciples to do something for him on one hand. We never really hear him telling them, listen, go get me some Jimmy John's. I really need me some, I need some fast. I need it, now. Or find me a place to nap. I'm getting a little bit tired. Find me, a little thing. Do something for me. It's just not his style to ask him to do stuff for him personally. But he does here. And he says, I feel like I'm being crushed. I feel like the olives that surround us, even to the point of death. So can you just stay with me? Just be with me. I need my community right now. I need you to watch with me. And you kind of think, Jesus must have been really going through it for him to turn to his disciples for support. So what is it that troubled him so much? Well, the immediate answer that comes to mind, of course, is he's about to hang and die on a cross the next day. And Jesus knows that this will be a painful and torturous experience. So just that would be unspeakably troubling in his soul and his heart and in his mind. But I'm going to suggest to us this morning that that's not what was troubling Jesus the most. I'm certain that was in his thinking. I know it was there. But what troubled Jesus more than the idea of the physical pain he would face that next day was understanding what he would endure spiritually. In that garden where the olives were pressed and were crushed, he knew that his soul would be crushed. And so we see it in verse 36. And he says, Abba, Father, everything's possible for you. Please take this cup from me. Take this cup of suffering away from me. But I want your will to be done and not mine. Now, there's not an actual cup or a goblet in front of him from which he must drink. There's not a physical thing there. Rather, what we're given here is a picture of Old Testament, okay? Several times in the Old Testament, the prophets speak about God's judgment delivered to man in a cup. Here it is. You must drink of it, okay? You're under judgment. And we hate to speak of it. Most of all me. I hate talking about that stuff. But he's saying you've sinned. You've separated yourself from the love and the goodness and the care of God. And here's a cup filled with the judgment of God, a holy and righteous God. And you're going to need to drink of it. It's a difficult thing. But I have to tell you this morning, God is extending a cup toward you. Not toward your spouse, not toward your friend, your neighbor, but toward you, toward me. And it's the cup of judgment that we all deserve. And for the most part, I don't need to persuade us that we've sinned against God. You know about it, about you. You know it about me. We all know it about each other. For the most part, there are exceptions. Now Jesus comes alongside you and he says, I'm going to take that cup and I'll drink it so you don't have to. That's what he did for you. When I was in college, a group of us friends, guys, I don't know, half dozen or so, were in Arkansas. And we were up in the Smoky Mountains, hiking around and messing around, and we came across what looked to be something built by Disney Imagineers. It was too perfect. There was this little trickling stream, and it came to this spot, and there was a long, like rock bed thing that went down a hill and ended in a big spring, a pool of water. And if you're 6 college guys, you're thinking, we should do this. And so we all, how do I say this? We all got dressed appropriately for what we were going to do. Stop picturing things. And then they were like, okay, who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? You know, and it's like, I'll do it and stuff. And so I sat down there and because there's water going on, and it was a water slide. And I shot down that thing and hit that pool of water, that mountain spring water, by the way, that was just probably snow minutes ago. And I have never experienced anything like that in my life. I didn't think I was going to die, but I thought, I'm going to probably need medical help of some kind. I couldn't breathe, and it wasn't all that deep, but it took us a second to get up again, and I've never taken a gasp like that in my life, and it was just, I can't even describe the shock. And I got out, and I was like, I got to go all the way to the top and get my clothes now, and I have to get the thing. And I was thinking about that, and what's the point? What I felt then really was a tremendous and fear-instilling shock. It was on my system. But literally, nothing, if I even attempt to compare it to this scenario. Nothing. Because he's going to deal the final blow to the life-sucking effects of sin in our world. The dreaded S word. Nobody wants to talk about it, again, let alone admit to it. So why is this so significant? Simply this. The word itself, sin, it means missing the mark. That's what it means. Another way to look at it would be that you and I have basically violated God's created order in a myriad of ways throughout our lives. And it's not, I made a mistake. I hear a lot of believers, that sin, and they go, man, I made a mistake, or, oh, whoops, that was a fail. That's YouTube. That's not real life. And so many are not convinced that they've actually ever sinned as well. But in reality, you and I chose to deliberately and willfully separate ourselves from the goodness and the grace and the holiness of God who created us. And something had to be done to remedy that once for all. See, if you could take all of the judgment and guilt and wrath that's been upon every human being who's ever walked this earth and distill it and concentrate it, pour it into one cup, what an ugly cup, don't you think? What a horrible thing. And not just all of us in this room. That'd be bad enough in the cup. How about everybody? All of humanity condensed, one cup. So it's no wonder Jesus would ask for that to bypass him. Here's what I'm wondering. How do you and I handle the cup of separation from our God? How do you handle that separation? How do you handle that cup of separation? Maybe you walk in denial. You just deny it. I saw a video of a guy walking around in Walmart, and he had a bunch of $10 Chick-fil-A cards. And he'd walk up to people and he'd go, I'll give you a $10 Chick-fil-A card if you can quote a Bible verse for me. And people were like, what? And some people would be kind of, oh man, when I was a kid, I remember, but I can't do it. Other people would just deny him outright and go, no, I'm not interested. Get away from me. I don't want to talk about that. Forget that. And then one guy came along, he goes, I'll give you a $10 Chick-fil-A card if you can quote one Bible verse for me. He looked at him with a big smile. He goes, Jesus wept. Got himself a sandwich. And we can deny it or we can minimize it. Well, I never murdered anybody. I never robbed a bank. I've never done anything huge like that. Basically, I ain't that bad. Some will even justify it through philosophy, through academia, thinking that they can just outthink God, the creator of thinking. Possibly you find yourself in that place where you just drink it yourself. You just give in, and you believe the effects of your sin are irreversible, unchangeable, that you're just lowly worm. You're totally unlovable. No possibility of reversal. Simply a piece of human refuse. Please stay with me. There's some good news that's going to be found. So no wonder he asks his guys, stay with me. I need some friends right now. I need to determine right now if I'm going to go through with this. Because if I am going to turn back, now's the time. If I'm going to keep walking over the Mount of Olives and escape into the Judea wilderness and just make a run for it like the Von Trapps, now's the time. If I'm going to turn my back on the destiny that I've known is mine from time itself, this is it. But I need to pray. I need to sort it all out with my Father. And he gets on his knees and he prays if it's possible. What does that mean? What does he mean by that, if it's possible? Just this. If there's any other way to accomplish the salvation of man other than me taking the place of humanity, other than me being treated as if I were a sinner, even though I'm not, if there's any other way, let's try that. And I can't help but wonder if you're a denier, or if you're a minimizer, or if you're a justifier, or if you're a deeply wounded drinker, do you think there might be another way? Do you think there's possibly another way? How many ways have you actually tried? Methods that circumvent the only answer we have that can repair the separation and restore relationship with God himself. See, there was no other way than for him to take the cup that you and I deserve to drink. But he didn't deserve it at all. Do you know what would be in the cup that Jesus deserved to drink? Nothing. Not a drop. But now this cup stands before him, and he struggles with his decision. He's willing to follow through with it, but he's asking God if there's any other way. And the answer from heaven in that moment is silence, because there was no other way. And so again in verse 36, he cries out, Abba, Father, everything's possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine. I think it's important to notice something here. Relationship remained intact between Jesus and his Father. Relationship remained intact. He says, Abba, Father. I think many of us, most of us, understand that to be like daddy, translated daddy, that warm, tender term of endearment like a child would use. And that's how Jesus spoke to his Father at this point in the garden. The other important thing is that Jesus was resigned to accomplishing the will of the Father. Not what I will, but what you will. He's fully committed to accomplishing the plan of our salvation. And don't think that there's some kind of a competition of wills, that Jesus is trying to like weasel his way out of it somehow. Because we are Trinitarian adherents here at the church at the Summit. He is fully united with the heart of the Father in that moment. And that oneness mandates that he stay the course of the cross. He remains faithful to the mission of the ages. But he certainly shrank back from the horror that he would face. And he's making sure that there's no other way to accomplish the salvation of man. And so I think that what's really important for us to understand is that what Jesus did on the cross actually began here in the garden. Certainly, it began in the beginning. It began at the creation. But I'm trying to narrow our significance here to this moment, to what's going on and to what's happening. Because if he had failed here, he would have failed at the cross. Because what Jesus accomplished in his struggle in the garden resulted in our salvation and our redemption. So that if you come to God and if you say to him, I want to receive that salvation, I want to receive what Jesus did for me, that he drank the cup, not I. You and I need to thank God for what Jesus accomplished in the Garden of Gethsemani. Had he failed there, he would have failed at the cross. You see how impacting that is? This struggle in the garden of crushing. It holds a prime place in the fulfilling of God's plan of redemption. His success here made the victory at the cross possible. So he says, Father, let's go ahead. Let's do this. Let's make this happen. Now, we see the struggle that Jesus faced. We've essentially been walking on holy ground for the past few minutes. This intense emotional struggle Jesus experienced in prayer before his Father, struggling with these eternal issues. That's what Jesus faced. There's another part to this account. Number 2, the struggle that the disciples faced. The struggles that the disciples faced. Because they faced the battle of the sandman. Verse 37, he returned and found the disciples asleep. He said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. And when I read this, I'm just kind of overwhelmed with the compassion of Jesus. How would you and I have done compared to the disciples? I can speak for me. Freshman year in Bible college, Florida. And it's a Friday evening, and they're having a special chapel. And the place is pretty full. And of course, I can't remember who spoke or taught or whatever, but at the end he said, basically, if you want to seal the deal, if you want to bring your heart to God this evening and seal this decision that we're talking about from the scriptures, why don't you just come on down? Just make your way down, and you can kneel up here. There's pews, and so I did that. I got up. I was like, I want that. I want to be that. And I went and I knelt at the front pew, and I was just praying. I was saying, God, I need this. God, I need you. I need this to happen. And as I'm praying, this thing came over me, and I was out, dead asleep, just like that, just gone. I mean, like real sleep. And evidently, I was out for a minute. So much so that like 4, 5, 6 of my friends were like, oh, we should go pray for Rory. And so they all kind of came over and they knelt down and they put their arms around me and put the thing in, and of course it woke me up. And so I just started going, yes, God, amen, Jesus. Thank you, Lord. Yes, I'm in. Thank you, God. That's how I would have done. But then, how would you and I have done compared to Jesus? we would have seen them sleeping there, and we would have said, what are you doing? I'm the one going through all of this. One time I asked you guys for some help. I've been pouring my life into you for 3 years, and now at this crucial time, I'm looking for a little something from you in return, and what do I get? But I think we need to see that even though Jesus is concerned about himself, his greatest concern is for them. And he asks, Simon, are you sleeping? And I can't help but think that got to Peter. Because we know that Peter's birth name was Simon, which is a fine name. But it represented who Peter was before Jesus got a hold of him. He's a guy who is capable, big highs, big lows. He's the roller coaster guy. He's up and down emotionally all the time. And Jesus comes along and he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do a major work in your life, and I'm going to call you Peter. Now, Peter means rock, not roller coaster guy. So it's all the more interesting that he now calls him Simon. It must have rattled him a little bit. He hasn't called me that in a while. And I'm not sure just when it hits him that it's actually more appropriate to call him Simon at that point. And he says to him, keep watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation, because you're going to face some crisis tonight as well. And unless you watch and pray, you won't be prepared to face the struggle that's headed your way. Something really important, I think, for us to understand. The disciples failed to watch and pray with Jesus. We're clear on that point. There's no mystery. But I'd like us to see the link. Jesus succeeded at watching and praying, and he fulfilled the crisis that he faced. Facing a crisis. Oh, there it is. And their crisis is, will they be identified with Jesus? Because someone's going to come along and ask, aren't you friends with Jesus? Aren't you one of his followers? And they'll have the choice to stick with Jesus or to abandon him. That's their struggle. And it's important to see that the disciples failed to watch and pray, and then they failed during their crisis. The point for us, that we would simply understand more often than not, the battle is won or lost in prayer before the crisis ever shows up. I think it's one of the fundamental aspects of spiritual warfare. We tend to think that the battle is won or lost at the actual moment of crisis, but it's mostly won in prayer before the actual crisis ever comes along. Now hear me, please. The crisis wasn't removed for Jesus. The cup still remained. But Jesus was given the supernatural wherewithal to see this thing through. Had the disciples watched and prayed, who knows how it would have gone down. Maybe they would have received the spiritual resources from God for the strength and the courage that they would have needed in that moment to stand with Jesus the way that they should have. But they didn't. They fell to temptation. Verse 39. And Jesus left them again and prayed the same prayer as before. When he returned to them again, he found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open, and they didn't know what to say. We see the picture here, yes? Jesus pours his heart out to God. Is there any other way? And he goes through that whole process. I don't want to be treated as sinful. And in the moment of release, he goes back and he checks on his guys, and they're out. And if they were like you and me, they would fake it like I did in college. Oh, just rest in my eyes, man, or we're here for you. We're praying now. And Jesus is like, good, they're with me now, okay? And he goes back to pray again. And after a while, we don't know how long, he comes back and they're asleep again. And they wake up. And I love this line in verse 40. They didn't know what to say. I mean, you've been awkwardly embarrassed in some way before in your life, I'm assuming, right? But there's no excuse the second time, right? And they're fumbling for the right words, but it just doesn't work. And Jesus says, Okay, I'm going to go back and pray. Verse 41. When he returned to them the third time, he said, go ahead and sleep. Have your rest. Some Bible translations make Jesus sound like a dad trying to get his kid out of bed for school. Even a little bit exasperated. What? But I don't think that's what's happening. I think this NLT translation works well. You guys go ahead and rest now. Get some sleep. Because I think this third time that he comes back to them, he's resolved his own struggle. He's in. He's found peace. He's found rest for himself. And he's like, I'm doing okay now. You go ahead and rest. It's going to be a long day tomorrow for sure. Get some sleep. I see here a tender interaction. I think of Jesus having come through the struggle for which his disciples should have been with him. Prayer, companionship. The greatest shepherd ever watching over them as they sleep. They should be up watching with him, but he's watching and praying over them. And then he says, but no, the time has come. The time has come. I just think that he saw the torches, maybe Judas himself with that detachment of soldiers coming. And he says, wake up, guys, it's time. And he says, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up, let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here. So this is what I'm seeing. The disciples waking up, still a little bit dazzled, a little embarrassed. Again, they didn't watch and pray with Jesus. They weren't available to minister to him in prayer and companionship during that critical moment. But please don't miss seeing the overwhelming love that Jesus has for them. Is it safe to say that you've been spiritually asleep at times as well? I sure have. You've let Jesus down when he's asked you to do something. I know I have. And when I miss the mark, Satan and my own flesh have this way of whispering harsh and condemning words to me and telling me, that's what Jesus is saying about me. He's so sick of you and your tears, your failure. He's so sick of you. Don't fall for it, okay? Don't fall for it. There is no condemnation for those who are in Jesus. Now, he'll correct us. He'll tell us what's wrong, what's going on. But it will never feel like harsh condemnation. Because here's the thing. If that voice is pushing you away from God, feeling embarrassed, feeling ashamed so that you don't want to go to God, you know it's from the enemy or you're just all up in your own head. But if it calls you to Jesus to bring the shame, bring the embarrassment to him for forgiveness, that's the Spirit convicting you and loving you and drawing you to the heart of Jesus. And we see love and compassion here. And yet, as I mentioned, we're about to watch them fail in the place of where they should have stood firm. Verse 43. Immediately, even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. They'd been sent by the leading priests, the teachers of religious law, and the elders. The traitor, Judas, had given them a prearranged signal. You will know which one to arrest when I greet him with a kiss. Then you can take him away under guard. As soon as they arrived, Judas walked up to Jesus. Rabbi, he exclaimed, and gave him the kiss. And the others grabbed Jesus and arrested him. This is just terrible. It's just terrible. And it's not just that Jesus was betrayed, not that he was betrayed by someone who he has led and who he has loved so deeply for 3 years, but he's betrayed with a kiss. A sign of friendship and affection. And the chief priests and scribes are thinking how perfect this is. They can just quietly arrest him without a big public scene on the down low, have a quick trial, condemn, crucify him before the crowd even has time to know what's going on. A kiss with a small army. But then verse 47. One of the men with Jesus pulled out his sword and struck the high priest's slave slashing off his ear. We almost kind of want to applaud. Yeah, somebody's sticking up for Jesus finally. But here's the thing. Jesus never asked any of his disciples to do something like this. What he asked them was to watch and pray. I've been there. How about you? I won't do what Jesus asks me to do, but I will do something he never asked of me. I won't watch and pray, but I'll defend Jesus. And he takes a big swipe at somebody and he gets their ear. Now, don't make the mistake of thinking that this was precision swordsmanship. More of an emotional reactionary swing. And I'm no military strategist, but I'm pretty sure you don't defeat an army by cutting off an ear. But this guy is so inexperienced and so inaccurate that the best he can come up with is an ear. So how awkward and embarrassing is this? Ear is on the ground. This poor kid, his name is Malchus, by the way, probably doing something really verbal. And they all look at it and they think, now what? So who's the swordsman? Doesn't say. But the Gospel of John tells us exactly who it was. It's roller coaster guy. It's Peter. John also tells us how Jesus dealt with the situation. Picks up the ear, replaces it on the guy, and he heals him. And the gracious thing about Jesus is that he's just saved Peter from a lot more trouble. If Jesus hadn't intervened, there might have been 4 crosses on that day instead of 3. It's a pretty serious crime. It's attempted murder, not attempted ear piercing. And here's the takeaway for you and me. Though they weren't faithful to him, he still remained faithful to them. Please understand that. Though they were not faithful to him, he was still faithful to them. You ever been unfaithful to Jesus? Don't raise your hand. But I have. And he has always been faithful. Always been faithful. One of my favorite songs in the world is entitled He's Been Faithful by the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir. And it doesn't matter. If it comes on in rotation in the car, I got to change it because I'll weep like a child because he's been so faithful. He's been so faithful. If you want to know how much, ask me to get coffee. I'll tell you. Look at what Jesus says in verse 48. He asked them, am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there among you, teaching every day. But these things are happening to fulfill what the scriptures say about me. Why now? He knew why. They did it in the down low so the crowds wouldn't get all worked up. And they take him away at the hand of the betrayer. Look at verse 50. Here's where it gets really tragic. All his disciples deserted him and ran away. Remember now? Verse 31. Peter, I die. I will die before I betray you, before I leave you, and all of them, it says, they all vowed the same thing. It ought not to be that way. Jesus poured himself into these guys for 3 years. And yes, Judas betrayed him, but they all abandoned him. Scattered like scared rabbits. When even just 1 or 2 of them should have stood with him. You take him, you take me. I'm staying with him. He's given me so much. He's spoken life to me. I am not leaving. Whatever you do to him, you can do to me. Not one of them did that. And this just gave me a thought that has stayed with me. I begin to understand that whenever I feel betrayed or forsaken, I know that my Jesus experienced it much worse. Here's the thing. I've been betrayed. I have been betrayed. I have betrayed others. And I've certainly betrayed Jesus. But none of that is anything like what he has experienced here. so that we all still very much need to receive the work of Jesus in our lives. But it also makes it so that I don't want the people who surround me to ever experience that. And when I see others who are experiencing it, I want to stand with them in prayer and companionship. I want to be there for them the way his disciples should have been there for him. Now, what do we see here? What are we seeing here? We're seeing just how completely Jesus was abandoned and forsaken. He's completely alone. Because what he needed to accomplish your salvation and mine was something that only he could do, the road only he could walk. Peter couldn't do it, John couldn't do it, Mark couldn't do it. Only the Son of God could do it. So my question for you today, will you receive it? Will you receive what Jesus accomplished through his struggle in the garden? The salvation, the redemption that you need. Can you receive that? Could you maybe picture him standing with you right now asking, will you receive this? But you would also do well to receive the understanding this morning that your battle is won or lost before the crisis ever arrives. Can you grasp that today? Because this week, you're likely to face something, some kind of roadblock, even a crisis, some kind of life difficulty. You can actually take just a moment, even now, to seek to set yourself on a firm foundation, to weather whatever it is that might come your way this week. You don't even know what's coming, but God knows. Maybe that's why he brought you here this morning, so you could hear this truth and prepare your heart today. Before you leave, you can take a few minutes to be with him. There at the end of service, there'll be people right here up front, ready and willing to pray with you and for you. And you can have a moment to watch and pray, to prepare your heart for what God wants to do in your life. Would you set your things aside and would you stand? Now, as we send you out this week into the unknown, may God grant you faith for the moment, grace for the day, strength for your journey in every way, in the name of Jesus. God bless you. We love you. Have a great week in the Lord.
Thank you for joining us online today. We hope that you felt encouraged or were impacted in some way throughout service. If something from worship or the message is stirring your heart, or maybe God is just prompting you to take some next steps in your faith, I just want to invite you to fill out an online Connect card, and our team would love to come alongside of you in that. Here at Summit, we believe that walking and living in community is vital to our walk with Jesus. If you're local, I want to invite you to join us here in person at Summit. And if you aren't local, I just want to encourage you to get planted into a local church. We love you so much. Have a great week.